My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Geoff Hall. It's November 18th, 2025, and we're at Argyle Winery in Newburgh. And Geoff, thank you so much for joining us today. First question to get you started is why wine?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think it was purposeful. Like, I think a lot of people in the wine industry, it was very much that I fell into it. Like, kind of my backstory there is, I went to college to be a doctor. If I'm being honest with myself, I never really wanted to be a doctor. I just thought that that's what you do when you go to college, was get a really important degree. And it really wasn't until like junior year of college or so, I started taking an elective in like plant science. It was a botany class. And I took it mostly because I was like, I've always grown up, loving being outdoors, loving nature. It's like, it'd be cool to learn a little bit more about plants. And at the time, I also thought maybe this one's easy. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I'm taking like microbiology and organic chem and all that. And I kind of loved it. I was like, I love the idea of like learning about the different plants, what their names are, where they grow. And through that semester, at the very end of it, I remember the professor basically, she just opens up to the class and says, look, we have summer internships. If anyone's interested, come and talk to me afterwards. And I went up and I was like, what does that entail? And she's like, well, it's kind of rigorous, but once or twice a week, we hop in a van and we go out into the middle of nowhere and we collect plants. And I'm like, so for the summer, I'll just be hiking around in the woods? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, sign me up. And right about that time, I was starting to do job shadowing internships at various like PT and hospitals. And I remember that spring I was sitting in a physical therapy place, a clinic, and I was job shadowing this physical therapist that like ran the pool. And it's like this pool with a treadmill on the bottom and stuff. And anyway, it was like 7 o'clock in the morning, which for me at like 20 years old was probably way too early. And just watching this person walk in a pool. And I remember falling asleep like multiple times. And I think even the physical therapist could tell that I'm just sitting there like, and I kind of left there and I was like, what am I doing with my life? Like, is this really what I want to do, is be inside all the time? And I remember there was another woman who worked in the herbarium, which is like the plant library. And she kind of took me under her wing one time and sat me down and was like, what are you doing with your life? Like, what are you going to do? And I was like, I'm still thinking about being a doctor. She's like, you really want to do that? I was like, no, not really. She's like, I think you should talk to my husband. Like, have you ever thought about viticulture? And I remember, at this point, I'm teaching the undergrads about botany. And I'm like, what's that? And she's like, seriously? You work at an herbarium, you don't know what viticulture is? I was like, no, I have no idea. And she's like, well, you grow wine grapes. And I remember specifically going, people get paid for that? And she's like, yeah, they do. And I'm like, that sounds great. And this is like you asked, like how wine or why wine, right? Like, I had no idea. Like, I didn't grow up drinking wine. I had a wine like a couple times in college and was like gross, and it was mostly because it was out of a bag. My parents didn't really necessarily grow up drinking wine. So for me, it was like this foreign concept. Like, the only wine I ever remember was Gato Negro when I was a kid at my friend's house. And his dad just like, would get the magnums of it. And I used to think, what a cool label. And that's about as far as I ever went. But at that point, she was like, you should come meet him. And so I met the professor. He ended up being on the food science side, so he was more like the enology track. He was like a great mentor at the time, and he's just like, look, if this is something that you're interested in doing, and it sounds like you are, why don't I put you in touch with an actual viticulture professor, but he doesn't work here because I'm at University of Idaho at the time. He's a professor at Washington State University, which is 8 miles away. And he's like, but you have to drive to Prosser, Washington and meet with the professor. And I was like, sure, I'll do that. Drove out there and sat down at Marcus Keller's desk for like probably 2 hours. We talked about everything. And again, like I'm fresh to this. Like I don't know anything about how vines are grown. I am not even like, I'm not even that far into like my development in terms of like how plants grow and stuff. But I remember sitting talking with him and just being like really inspired about everything he has done and like what the industry does and what I would be doing as a graduate student with him. And I remember calling my girlfriend, who's my wife at the time, on the drive back, which was like 3 hours. And she's like, well, how did it go? And I was like, I think I found it. Like, I think I found what I want to do. And that was like really the first time I ever felt that kind of inspiration. So it was really kind of a powerful moment for me to be able to kind of like walk away and be like, yes, I feel really good about this. And from there, you know, Marcus called me the next day and was like, all right, I'd love for you to come and get a master's degree with me, and laid out how it works. And basically I haven't looked back since, really. So yeah, that, you know, like how I got into wine is like, and I think the wine industry is riddled with that. I'm sure a lot of your interviews are like, you know, Kate's like, I went in to be an optometrist. And I know somebody's like, I went in to be in pharmaceuticals. And eventually it like tends to grab people and pull them in. And I say this a lot because like the wine industry is riddled with people in their second career. And almost no one in the wine industry is like, I don't think this is for me. I'm going to go follow my passion, which is accounting, and then go and be an accountant. Like that just doesn't happen. Typically when people get in the wine industry, they're in it for the long haul, which I think is really cool.
We'll pick it back up there in a second. Let's talk about life before wine a little bit. Tell us about where you were born and raised and kind of life before you got to University of Idaho. Yeah,
so was born in Juneau, Alaska. Moved to Boise, Idaho when I was about 6 years old. Grew up there. I had like, you know, in my opinion, like a great childhood. Lived next to the foothills, so I was able to wander around in nature as much as I wanted to. Parents were great about always making sure we're going on camping trips, fishing trips, backpacking. So I think like going back to, you know, why I wanted to take that botany class, but also like, I think what that person I worked with at the time, what she recognized is like, you love being outside. Mm-hmm. And we talked about this before, like I also can't stop. And so like, there's no better place to like feel stifled than having to sit inside all the time. And so I think it just felt very natural because that's like how I grew up, was like always riding bikes, always hiking, biking, fishing, all those types of things. And so, yeah, and I think like even to this day, like in how we can get into how I've evolved to where I am now, like definitely my happy place is like the very small amount of time I still get to get out into the vineyards. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I grew up in Boise, went to University of Idaho. Again, like, so I'm the youngest of four, and I didn't choose University of Idaho. It basically was my only choice. And looking back on it, like, all of that was the right decision, but as I start to know like more people and like who have kids who are getting ready for college and like all the prep it takes and everything, you know, everyone in my family went to University of Idaho. My parents went to University of Idaho. That's where my parents grew up. It just was like once I was like old enough to understand what college was, I was like, I guess that's where I'm going. Mm-hmm. And going back to like how I got into wine, like how directionless I was there for a little while. Like when I'm 18 and I'm getting ready to go to college, I remember them going to this like orientation. This was in Boise before you go up to U of I, and they're like, okay, you have to pick a major. And I remember sitting in the room being like, I hadn't thought about that. And like looking back on them, like how woefully unprepared I was. And I was like, so how do I do this? And they're like, well, here's your list. And I made it to the B's. And I went, ooh, biology. That sounds like fun. And I didn't go past that. And I'm like thinking back on like, how was no one sitting me down to be like, all right, what are you passionate about? What do you want to learn about? And here's the colleges you can go to that are good for this. I consider myself very lucky that, again, that I've just kind of fell into a series of these events that each one has led me to something that like, I'm happy with where I'm at. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you meet Marcus Keller and you have kind of an instant, like, this is what I want to do, this is where I want to be. Tell me about the next step, tell me about the master's program and about working with him on the master's degree. Yeah,
so like part of what drew me to it was what Marcus was telling me about like the program and what I'd be doing. And like probably, if I'm being honest, like the large portion of it was just Marcus Keller himself. Like the dude he's a genius and he's, world renowned for viticulture. And I didn't know that at the time, but I could tell instantly with talking with him just how focused he is on it, what his knowledge is, and also just like how willing he was to share and to train me in it. Because he could have been like, look, you've never even taken a horticulture class and you're gonna come in and you're gonna learn this. And like a master's degree, I'm not saying it's like the most difficult thing in the world, but like it's a lot of self-focus. Like you gotta study on your own. He's not sitting there being like, read this and then come back and talk to me about it. So there was a lot of trust there, which I also appreciated. Mm-hmm. But also just like, I loved the idea of him being like, look, you're gonna focus on this topic. I have this topic already laid out for you. It's incredibly specific and no one's ever solved it before, but we're gonna work on it together and I'm gonna help you along the way. Mm-hmm. But he's like, a lot of this is gonna be you and I need to trust you that you're gonna be able to do it. And I remember that was kind of the first time that anyone had ever really talked to me like that, in that way, and given me that amount of responsibility. Because up to that point in undergrad, you show up to classes, you make sure you do well on your test, and that's it, right? But this was more like a job in a way. And I loved it. Like for the first few months, he talks to me about what the problem, which at the time they called it berry shrivel, and it's evolved into other names like sad and stuff like that. But he talked to me about it, and then he just set me loose with his whole catalog of all of his papers. So you're sitting in his office, and on this wall he has these white boxes that are about this thick. And each one holds probably like 100 different scientific papers that he's printed out and drawn, highlighted things and wrote notes on everything. And the first thing that he gives you to download is basically like the bibliography for everything that's in there. And there's like thousands of these papers, right? And he's like, so you have this list. You're gonna create your own list of everything that you read, and all the notes that you're gonna take on it, and you're just gonna start developing like a story. And I loved that idea of like coming into it completely fresh, which, maybe looking back was one of the reasons why he wanted me to do it, was I wasn't coming in with any preconceived notions on like horticulture or vines or anything like that. And so I was really starting from scratch, and he's like, I'll give you the first few papers, and then from there I want you to just go, start reading. And I read all the time. And this is like, my wife and I joke about it now, like I did not read before that. I did not read for fun. Growing up, I remember my parents, like when I was in elementary school, being worried about how little I was reading. Like it wasn't something that I was interested in doing. And so it was a huge shift for me to be like, okay, I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna read 20 papers today. And just like every single paper you're taking notes, sometimes you're reading it twice. And what was great is you started to kind of like build a narrative you're like, oh, that's an interesting concept. I'm going to put that over here and hold it. And then you put stuff in different buckets, and you're looking at like how the phloem works, how the xylem works, photosynthesis, and you're looking for kind of nuggets where you feel like, oh, well, maybe this is what's causing this disorder to happen. So it was kind of, in a way, it was like investigating, and I loved that. And at the same time, I was learning, you know, a whole bunch of practical things about viticulture. Like, I probably took it maybe for granted at the time, but like, I remember towards the end saying like, being in a vineyard with Marcus for an hour is like 6 months of education, because for one, he's very captivating in the way that he talks about it. He's very passionate. He's just so knowledgeable. So you can just sit there and you'll ask a question, he'll explain exactly what it needs to be, which will lead to the next question, and then all of a sudden within an hour, you're like, I mean, I could have read books, I could have read more papers, or I could just spend that hour with Marcus. And so that was huge for me in my development. But yeah, like, did 2.5 years of that, ended up publishing 2 papers on berry shrivel, which I was very happy and very proud of doing. I never thought that would be something that I would ever do. Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, thought it was a great time.
In addition to the education and spending time in the vineyard like that, were there internships involved? Was there a practical application?
Yeah, no, I never like interned. It was always focused on the research. That being said, where I did my experiments was incredibly valuable for later in my career. So one of the places I was doing my experiments was at St. Michele, at their V10 or their Patterson vineyard. So I got to know people like Bill Riley, who was their research viticulturist, Russ Smitherman. And like, I'm sure like these guys are like veterans in the industry, and they're probably looking at this like 22-year-old kid like, oh, here's another one sort of thing. And like, at least I was smart enough to like admit that I don't know what I don't know. And at that time I didn't know much. So it was great interacting with them and you know, hearing how they were dealing with not only like the condition or the disorder that I was working on, but just everything in viticulture. Like, kind of gave me, I guess, like advanced look under the hood of what it's like to be in the industry. And that was really influential for me, but also like, that's eventually how I came back to St. Michele, right? Was I got the call a few years later from Bill Riley, and he's like, look, there's an opening and I think you need to come and apply for it. And Bill and I, like, we had a good relationship where like we worked together in those vineyards, but also one of the things I loved about my master's degree was Marcus Keller every Friday we had this like little conference room, and every Friday he'd open up a couple wines, or, you know, Bill who worked at St. Michele would bring some wines, and we'd sit around, we'd taste the wines and talk about them. And really that was like the first time that I started like enjoying wine. And so not only was I knowing Bill like kind of in the professional environment, but also like him coming in like on his Friday to hang out and have a glass of wine with everyone. And so, you know, I got to know Bill really well. And so when he called me and was like, I think this is a good opportunity for you, like, I took that seriously. And yeah, it worked out for me.
So tell me about that. Tell me about first experience after the master's degree.
Yeah, so another great Marcus Keller moment was, he's like, look, what do you want to do? And I didn't know, like, I loved research, and I really thought like, oh, maybe this is something I'd like to do. And he kind of sat me down and he's like, is it really something that you're interested in? And I was like, yeah, I really like it. And he's like, enough to do another 5 years of exactly what you're doing right now, plus another 10 years before you even start to like really like get into your actual career. And I was like, oh, maybe not. And he's like, here's what I'd recommend. He's like, why don't you go travel? And again, like I'm new to this, and I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, there's other wine industries in the world. And like I knew that at least, but he's like, you know, a lot of the people who have worked for me, they, you know, sometimes they go and they work at other countries. I was like, geez, all right, I'd love to do that, right? I'm like, go travel around for a little while. And I wrote, I don't know, hundreds of emails to like info at, and then whatever winery I could find on a website. I remember sitting in my bed at night, just writing as many as I could. And I got one response. And they wrote back and they were like, yep, you can start on this date, you're hired. I'm like, great. Didn't know anything about the company. It ended up being Chateau in Italy, which is like in the Barolo region. And again, like I didn't know, like I could look at their website and they say they're great, like most wineries do. And I got really lucky there too, because they are like a great winery and they're very well respected in the area. And that was just like, that was a wild, incredible experience for me, because I went into it kind of eyes wide open, knowing that I was going to learn a whole lot because I had never worked in a cellar before. I got there in July, and they gave me and the other French intern, we swapped where every other week I was in the vineyard and then the cellar. And so I got, you know, basically like a month of work in the vineyard, which is like, just like funny when you think about it, because like here I am coming out of a master's degree, and like I by no means am the person who's like, oh, you know, I'm kind of smart, I got like a program. Like I went into it like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. They knew that too, and they were like, all right, so your first job is you're gonna go and we have string up. You're gonna cut the string, and you're gonna pull it into a little ball, and you're gonna set it there. And I was like, I can do that for you. Like, I'll do anything, I don't care. I'm just here to learn, right? And it's not like I ever learned, it's not like anyone there, like, you know, I didn't speak Italian. All the people in the vineyard, like none of them spoke English. So like they weren't even attempting to teach me. And like, I get that. I don't know if I would have done that with somebody, but it was a really great experience, because they're like, okay, we're gonna drop you off here and we'll see you in 9 hours. I'm like, all right, love it. And looking back on it, I'm like, so I got to roam around a vineyard in Barolo for 9 hours a day? Like, can you beat that, honestly? And I think like during that, I was just sort of like observing how they grow things and just trying to soak it all up. Mm-hmm. But also just like, you know, living in another country, not speaking the language, tried to learn as fast as I could, because I felt like I should, like I needed to. And by the time harvest came around, I was in the cellar pretty much the whole time, and I loved that. Like, I remember my first day, my very first day, I like flew in the day before, and I'm like, I'm ready to work right now. And the woman's like, no. Like, no, you're not. You're gonna be tired. I'm like, I feel pretty good. And like, this is me, like, I slept in the train station the entire night before, because I showed up, I got off the plane, and I was like, all right, my train leaves at 10 a.m. the next morning. This is 9 p.m. the night before. And I was like, I'll just hang out in the train station. Like, there'll be stuff that's open. No, they kick you out of the train station at 11. So I'm just like sleeping on the steps, like, I didn't plan this out appropriately. Anyway, I'm like, I'm ready to work right now. And she's like, yeah, no, like, you need to go home and sleep. She was right. But the next morning, my favorite part of it was they put me downstairs with this, down in the cellar where all the barrels were, with, he's probably 75-year-old Italian guy. Like, did not speak English, does not want to speak English, just talks to you in Italian as fast as he can, and was almost purposely frustrated by me. Because, like, I get it. I'm like this 24 or whatever at the time kid. And they're like, all right, Alessandro, he's yours. And the guy's like, and he's like in Italian, like, go over there and pick up the barrel and bring it over here. And I'm like, what? And that was my whole first day in the cellar. And I just was like, oh, this is great. Like, I'm going to have a great time. Ended up getting along with that guy really well, especially once I started to learn Italian a little bit better. And he's like, yeah, you know, I had to give you shit the first few weeks. Like, you needed to earn your place. But yeah, like working in the cellar, I loved it. Like I say, I learned Italian not from any of the Italians. I learned it from the Romanians I worked with. And everyone there was just like, they were really great. They were patient, but also like, we had a great time, and they would kind of like, they would push me in ways that like I actually respected at the time, because I grew up like in Boise. Like, my first job was working at the golf course as a maintenance person, and I think I was not 15 yet when I started. And I remember, because my brother got me the job because he was working there at the time, and I remember meeting with the golf course superintendent, and he like leans over to my brother. He's like, is he 15? And my brother's like, no, he's not. He's like, when does he turn? He's like, May 31st. And I was like, all right, I'll pay him under the table for the first month. I'm like, what's going on? And what I loved about that place was like, from the age I was, 14, almost 15, was like, you get there at 4:30 in the morning and you work ass off all day long. And so that helped me develop that like appreciation for working like that. And like we talked about, like, I'm somebody who can't stop myself. And I always need to be moving. So that was like a great job, just to like, you're always moving, you're always doing something. We would challenge each other to see who could get done with mowing the greens faster. And so that was kind of like the way that I learned how to like work those manual jobs. And then I went to college, and then it was very much like you study all the time, and like I worked in a kitchen, and that was great too. But then it felt really good being back in the cellar, or like in the cellar for the first time, but back to that, like, we're here all day long, we work hard, we move fast, you don't have a day off for a couple months. And that felt great. Like, I felt like that good exhausted at the end of the day. And also, I didn't mind getting the 2-hour siesta in the middle of the day, and taking my first ever like midday naps, where I was like, oh, this is great. I can't believe we don't do this in America. But yeah, it was a good time. So from there, I worked until like November, so like way after harvest. And again, like, that was 2010. I didn't realize at the time, I thought like, all vintages were going to be good. But that ended up being like one of their best in decades or whatever. And that was cool because I was able to get like some of those wines back and Barolo ages for a long time. So I have like 4 or 5 bottles sitting in my cellar that probably I'll never drink. But then from there, the winemaker was like, look, you can stick around. And like, I'm not there legally to be open about it. Like, he's like, you come and I pay you cash. And I remember in the email being like, is there a permit or a visa or something I'm supposed to get? He's like, no, and don't ask anyone, you just come. And I'm like, okay. And so they just handed me cash every week, which was great. But he's like, look, you can stick around, like, you could be here next year if you wanted to. And my girlfriend at the time, again, who's my wife now, I was like, nah, I should probably get back. And I still tell her to this day, I'm like, we should have stayed. Like, you were getting your PhD, we could have done that later. We could have lived in Italy for a few years, But I came back and I was like plotting the next place to go. Did the exact same thing where I just wrote emails to a whole bunch of places in Australia, Argentina, New Zealand. Got one response in Tasmania, and it was the same exact response. Yep, you can come work for me. And I'm like, okay, cool. Didn't know anything about the place, about the person. Showed up, and it ended up being like, again, kind of, I feel lucky throughout my career, but just ended up being like an incredible experience where I worked for this guy, Peter, who was in his 80s at the time. He worked for like IBM in Europe, was like some top executive, wanted to retire and open up his own winery in Tasmania. And when he got there, he was like, I loved him because he gave just two shits about anything. And he's like the perfect 80-year-old grumpy Swiss German, who coincidentally, Marcus Keller was Swiss German, so I had experience working with them. And I later found out that was part of the reason why I got the job, was that I had worked with Marcus Keller and he knew the name, and that I had worked at Toretto and he knew Toretto. And so got lucky, I guess, that I put those in the email to him. But he was like, when he moved to Tasmania, they asked him, like, well, so what are you going to grow? Like, he bought this 13-hectare property, and he's like, I'm gonna grow Merlot, and I'm gonna grow Sauvignon Blanc. And they're like, dude, what? We grow like sparkling wine here. And he's like, well, you're idiots. You're all idiots, and I'm gonna show you. And he did. Like, those wines were incredible. And again, I didn't realize it at the time until I'm like there and talking with him and talking with their salespeople. And like they're leaning over and they're like, dude, this wine just got like a 98. And I'm like, seriously? That's pretty good, right? But that was another great experience. Very different than the Italian one, where like the Italian, I lived on site, which was great. But I also lived with like 3 other interns at the time, which was also great because it was just fun. This one, I'm like out in the middle of nowhere by myself, living above the winery. And I loved that. Like, first of all, Tasmania is like one of the most beautiful places in the world. So as soon as I learned how to drive on the other side of the road, they were like, here's the keys to this ute, which is basically like the smallest truck you could ever imagine. And I'm like, I can just take it anywhere? He's like, yeah, just be responsible. And every minute that I had off that summer and through harvest, I was driving all over, camping in the back of it. It was awesome. So that part of it was really great. And then working with Peter was really great because it was basically like him and me. And I learned more about like how to be self-sufficient and how to like work in a vineyard through him than I did obviously like in Italy, where I wasn't able to ask questions thoroughly and they're like pull the string off or whatever. But yeah, that was a great experience. And I still remember one of my favorite moments with him was, not only was he like a really great person, he was just like really generous with his time, and he kind of knew that I was just sitting up there living by myself. And he'd be like, come up to dinner tonight. And you'd walk up to his house, and he would cook this like amazing meal, and you just sit there and just like have a conversation with him while he's cooking. And he'd be opening up wines like all the time. And again, I'm like pretty new into the wine. Like at this point, like probably the most expensive bottle I bought was like $12 or something like that. And I'm like, whew, this is a lot of money. And, you know, apart from like drinking everything that we had in Italy, this was kind of the first experience that like opened up like to the whole world, right? Like in Italy, we were very much drinking like Italian wine and almost always drinking Toretto wine. And Peter had this like cellar in his basement that was insane. Like, and I didn't know any of the producers or anything like that, but I'm like, this place is huge. He's got a bunch of wines here. And he's like, I've been collecting my whole life. And I remember sitting down at like one of the dinners in particular, and right before he's like, look, what year were you born? Like 1985. He's like, cool, come up to dinner tonight. And we're sitting there and he's like, so I went down to my cellar and I found 2 bottles of Toretto from 1985. I'm I'm like, okay. And he's like, so we're going to open, we're going to drink them. I'm like, all right. And first of all, they were incredible. And apparently that was like another really good year. And also he's like very forthcoming with his knowledge. So he's like talking about the wine and why he feels like it's good. And then like that night, and pretty much every night I had dinner with him, was just a series of them like bringing out wines that like I didn't know what they were. And I remember like always feeling like they're good. But in particular, there was this one night and he brings out this bottle and we're drinking it. And like, we're a few bottles in at this point. Like, this man could drink me under the table any day. And I don't even drink that much. Like, I can have like a glass or two and I'm like, I'm good. And this is like bottle 4 or something. And he's like, oh, here, you know what? Screw it, let's open it. And I drink it and I'm like, whoa, Peter, like, this is something else. Like all the wines you've poured for me every other night I've been here, like they're great. Wow, that's incredible. And he's like, good, you should like it. And I'm like, what does that mean? He's like, it's very, very expensive. And I'm like, I feel like you're wasting it on me. And he's like, I'm 80 years old, man. Like, I don't have much longer to drink all this wine. If I drank 3 bottles a night for the rest of my life, I still don't think I could get through that cellar. And he's like, why not open it up with you? And I remember like being very humbled by that comment, but also like remembering that, like logging that in the back of my brain where I'm like, yeah, don't just like hold on to it, like open it with special people that you want to share it with. And even if that special person is, you know, a 25-year-old kid from America who doesn't know anything about drinking wine. Because it worked. That wine was incredible. But yeah, I loved working there. Those were like my 2 kind of main internships, and both of those were very different, but very just like cool and kind of life-changing for me in a way. First time like really moving that far away from anyone, really traveling by myself. And you know, like I've been joking this whole time about that like that kind of feeling like I wasn't prepared or I didn't know what I was getting myself into. Like part of that's unintentional, and that's probably me needing to be smarter and more prepared in my life. And I think like really if I look back on it, the other part of it was like I really wanted to not over prepare for things, and I really wanted to be open to stuff. And I didn't realize it probably until now that like that's probably how I've lived most of my life, is like I'm not going to go into this with too many preconceived notions, and I'll select these like very specific situations like those internships, or maybe like starting a new job where I'm like, I'm just going to go into it. I'm going to learn as much as I can. I'm curious. I'm always curious, and I just want to go into it and enjoy it. And I'm glad that I did that. And I don't want that to come off as like I'm freewheeling and no stress, like high anxiety most of the time, if I'm being honest. But those in particular were great moments for me to just be like, I'm going to move to Tasmania and I'm going to figure it out. And that was really important for me at that moment in my life.
So coming off of those 2 experiences, as you say, kind of life-changing experiences, tell me about what you saw as you looked ahead for yourself. Did you have a path in mind? Did you have something you wanted to do in the wine industry, or were you still kind of at the figuring it out part of things?
I think I knew that I wanted to be in the vineyard. So I wasn't necessarily, when I was in Tasmania, I started applying for jobs back in America. I knew that I probably didn't want to be in the cellar. It wasn't really my strong suit. It wasn't where I felt. I think probably going back to like being indoors most of the time. And so a lot of my job searches were for things in vineyards. I don't think I really knew, even to that point, I don't think I really knew like the best career path and what that would look like. I think I was still like, I'm going to take this one step at a time and figure out where that leads me. So at that point, that's where I applied for a job at Adelsheim as their grow relations liaison, I believe was the title, which I had to look up what that meant when I applied for it. And it turns out it was like really well suited to me because, I still remember like having my video interview with David Adelsheim and Chad Vargas, and they're asking me all these questions, and like I prepared. I felt like I tried to gain as much knowledge as I could about Adelsheim. Like I came into that interview prepared, but I still didn't like fully grasp the concept of what a grow relations liaison was, and partly because like I had never worked in that part of the industry. But I remember them asking me a lot of questions that like I felt really suited to be able to do. They're like, so you'd be out, you'd be interacting with growers, and how do you think you get a grower to do something that maybe they don't want? And like those, I didn't prepare on how to answer that. It just was off the cuff. And I kind of realized like during the interview, I was like, oh, I can do that. I can talk to growers. That's what I did in my master's degree, was working with St. Michele and the other people about what their problems are and helping them solve it. Like, ultimately, that's kind of what it is a lot of problem solving and not so much negotiating, but I don't know, coming to a common ground on the best way to do things. And I felt like my personality was a fit for that. And they obviously did as well. They hired me, and I realized like at the time that did feel like a strong suit for me, like being able to go out and work with somebody who like fundamentally doesn't really want to follow what you want them to do, right? They aren't, the growers aren't incentivized to go out and like drop crop. And there's always this kind of like push and pull between the winery and the vineyard manager or the vineyard owner. And I think looking back on it, probably it was really great that I learned that in the orchid industry for that year that I worked at Adelsheim, because first off, like I worked with a lot of really great growers who I really respected. Di Chris, Evan Bellinger, all these people that like, they had been in the industry. Obviously Di had been in it a long time. But they didn't like, oh, who's this newcomer, idiot doesn't know what he's doing. And like, again, pretty much done this every path I've gone down. Like, I don't know what I don't know. And I'm gonna make that obvious to people, but like, as long as they know that my intention is real and like I'm going to help them at the same time I'm helping the company, like I can do those things. And I think hopefully they picked up on that, and we ended up having great working relationships. So I never felt like there was that tension. And so when I got called by Bill Riley to go to St. Michele up in Washington, that was, in my mind, it was like a continuation of that, right? I got to be very much like on the technical viticulture side of it, but really you're kind of a grow relations person. Maybe you're not, at the time we weren't dealing with like the actual like creating of the contracts, but you were executing the contracts and like, I need this to be at this many tons per acre, I need it to look like this, and you work with all these people who have all these different backgrounds, and you're trying to come to some common ground on how you can make the best possible product that's still profitable for them. And I loved that side of it. And that's probably, that's probably where I developed a lot of my skills on, being able to work with people, and negotiate with them and get along with a completely different set of personalities. Because like you'd go to like one vineyard and it was easy. You're like, hey, just wanted to come out and tell you that we probably need this. Oh yeah, no problem, we got that for you. I'm like, oh, that's great. And then you go up to like Ted Wildman's place and you're like, so I'm thinking, he's like, no. Like, yeah, no, I figured you'd say that. Could I get you? He's like, probably not. I don't think you're gonna get me to do anything. I'm like, okay, cool. Yeah, no, cool. And then you have to like figure out how to work with that person and that person and that person. So you're working with all these different personalities. And I think that was a great learning experience for me. Yeah, and so from there, I did St. Michele for I think I started there in 2012. And then within kind of the first year, I met Gary Horner, who's down at Erath at the time. And Erath didn't have, they were part of the St. Michele world, but they were kind of off on an island. They didn't have any estate vineyards, but they were buying a lot of fruit. And Bill Riley, who I had worked with when I was doing my master's degree, he was kind of like this go down maybe once a month to Oregon and kind of like check out vineyards for Gary, because it's just a lot of vineyards to look at. And I started kind of talking with my supervisor at the time and Kevin Corliss, who was in charge of all the vineyards for St. Michele, being like, you guys, you need a full-time person down there. And at that same time, they started looking at potentially buying a vineyard. This ended up being Willikaya. And that I kind of like jumped right in and was like, I want to be involved in that. I want to help with the purchase of that property. I want to do all the investigation. So I went down and like did all this mapping and testing and all these types of things, which was really good experience for me to kind of figure out how you would value a vineyard in Oregon. And then right after they purchased it, they came to me and they're like, all right, your wish is granted. You can move back to Oregon now. And so I took on like all the viticulture, all the grow relations. And then we had Willikaya, and then we eventually bought Knight's Gambit as well. So I loved that role because, for one, I felt like I was out on an island. Like I was part of the St. Michele world, but I wasn't going into the St. Michele offices every day. I was like a department of one, if you can call it that. And I worked closely with Gary, and basically, you know, we got to decide like where we want to purchase fruit from and what we want it to look like and how we want to farm Willikaya. And that helped me learn a lot about the Oregon industry and about like how to grow stuff in Oregon, and not only at like you crop it at 2.5 and every single shoot is perfectly upright and every leaf needs to have its own ecosystem sort of thing, like which you can do, but also like how you can grow Pinot Noir at scale and for value. And so I got to kind of see like those two sides, because like at Adelsheim it was very much like the shoots are like this. If they're like this, you better go out there and fix it, right? Like, and I remember Dave Page at the time. So granted, this was 2011, which was a very cold year here. And when I worked at Adelsheim, like I still didn't know like anything about the Oregon industry. I was like trying to learn, right? And I remember coming in and being like, so what are we cropping at, like 4.5, 5.5 tons per acre? And they're like, what the hell is wrong with you? Because all my experience had been in Washington up to that point, where like you're cropping Cab at 5 and Riesling at 7. I had no idea. And I remember at the middle point of harvest, Dave Page came to me, and he was fired up, and he's like, I can't believe you guys brought me something at 3.2 tons per acre. And I was like, Dave, that block looked great. I don't know what you're talking about. He's like, I've never made a good wine above 3 tons per acre. I was like, that's an incredibly specific number. Is that irregardless of the year? And he's like, never above 3. And I remember, like, obviously to that day, still remembering that moment where I'm like, whoa, is it that dogmatic here? And so fast forward a few years and I'm at Erath, right? Like, I did find out that yes, you can farm some stuff. And I think the industry had been changing at that point. Patty Skinkis's research was starting to begin at that point. And the industry had like totally gone from this, like, it needs to be at 2. 2 is where you get the best quality, to now people are like 3.5, sometimes 4. And then other people are like, I don't care. It's going to look good. It's going to be fine. Like, know what your product is. And so at Erath, like I gained a lot of that experience, which felt like a really valuable moment for me. Yeah, and then, I don't know, I mean, I guess from there, this has been a fortunate thing in my career, I suppose, is like, I've never really spent much time looking for the next thing. It's usually the next thing is come and found me. Like other than that first time at Adelsheim, that was me like applying for a job. It's usually been somebody calls and they're like, hey, you know, you should probably come work for us. And Argyle was that. And like Argyle was like Luke Higgins, who was the director of operations at the time. Ryan Collins was the viticulturist, if you will, kind of in this between Alan Holstein. It was supposed to be Ryan Collins. He was like the heir apparent. And I remember all these conversations with Ryan because I was good friends with him before. And I'm like, so how is it there? And he's like, well, it's pretty awful. I'm like, okay, yeah, cool. Cool, I'm sorry that's the way that's working out. He's like, oh, I hope it gets better. And then 2 months later, he's like, yeah, moving to Australia. I'm like, wow, that was fast. I think he was at Argyle for like 7 months or something. And as he's telling me he's moving to Australia, he's like, hey, I just want you to know, I think you should take the Argyle job. And I'm like, Ryan, you've never been like necessarily positive about it. And he's like, no, all that stuff's settled now. Like there's a good path forward. And he's like, my boss will probably call you. His name's Luke. And he calls me, this is like middle of harvest. And he calls me and we have a conversation. And I remember I'm just like driving around because that's all I did at St. Michele. It felt like during harvest was just drive all the time to all the vineyards, collecting samples. And he was like, look, I think you should come and just have dinner with me. Like, I know you're happy. And I'm like, I like where I work. I don't have any intention. At that time, you know, my supervisors were like, okay, well, let's groom you for like the next step. And what does that look like? And what do you need? And I'm like, I feel supported. I like where I'm at. And after talking with Luke, it's not so much that Luke convinced me, it's just that he laid out what the opportunity was. And really what captivated me was like, up to this point, my career had always been on that grow relations, viticulture side of things, and I'd never learned the operations side. And I kind of felt like, and I remember having this conversation with my wife where I'm like, I feel like if I don't take this Argyle job and I don't learn the operations side, and let's say I get promoted at St. Michele into whatever that next role is, I'll never learn it. Like that's gone. And then I'll be trying to like lead people who are in charge of operations but not actually understand it. And I was like, I think I need to do it. And I think it's the challenge that I need right now. And you know, I tell this story all the time, but like looking back on it, like that was crazy. That was a really dumb idea at the time because I was like, I didn't speak Spanish. My sole job at the time was to lead 22 Spanish speakers on how to farm a vineyard. And I didn't know how to farm a vineyard, right? Like I was very much the like, here's how I think it should look for quality, right? Like I wasn't the person leading the crews on how to do that. And so I had to learn real fast. And that was one, it was incredibly challenging, it was eye-opening, but it was also like one of the best decisions I ever made. Like I just said it was the worst decision I ever made, best decision I ever made because I gained that knowledge so fast. And I had to, like there was no other way than you have to figure out how to learn Spanish very fast. Got a tutor, worked with the people, tried to speak only in Spanish, and developed that as fast as I possibly could. And then the operations side was like the same sort of thing that I've done pretty much everywhere I've gone, which like I went in like hand on heart to the vineyard crew and I was like, I'm not the expert, right? Like I know how things should look. I know how I want them to go. I can see where like, this is even in the winter, I'm like, I'm seeing where I can like tell we need to make improvements, but I need you guys to help me with that. And if I look back on that, like the first time I met with the 3 supervisors we had, like they were probably like, oh my God, this guy just came in and doesn't know what the hell he's doing, which like fair, very much fair. But I held true to my word, which I was like, look, I need you guys to lead. Like, you guys know this place, and I need you to tell me how we should manage it. Like, I'll help you, I'll guide you, but in particular, within the first few weeks, like, I learned that a lot of those people had been at that vineyard alone longer than I had been in the industry by 3 times, right? Like, Marquez had been, he planted Lone Star, and he had been growing that vineyard for like 25 years. And so it's like, you know, like, going back on like kind of trying to be humble, like, you don't go in and tell that person what they're supposed to do, right? Like, you listen to them and you ask them questions, and, you know, we have this kind of story now, but like, one of the first things I learned in Spanish was "¿Qué piensas?", which means like, what do you think? And I remember the first time I started asking that question, and the crew looking at me like dumbfounded. They're like, "You mean, what do I think? What do you think? You're just supposed to tell us what to do." And I was like, no, like, I have an idea. I can tell you what I want it to look like. How do we get there? What do you think? And I remember the first time that they kind of like, you know, they got over the like, holy crap, this guy's a lost cause. And more into the like, oh, he's serious. Like, I do get to make this decision. And it was like eye-opening for myself, but I think eye-opening for them, where they're like, all right, we're gonna have more ownership over this place. And like, that's what I wanted. They had never had that really in the past. And I don't think people were asking a lot of questions about like, well, what should we do? But what I started to see was like this unlocking of whatever, their potential, their knowledge, and like their innate knowledge. This isn't like textbook knowledge that I learn or like what you get into school or something like that. They just know intrinsically what that vineyard is supposed to look like and how to get it to that point. And I learned a lot during that point. And like, up to this point, I had never led people, right? Like at St. Michele, I had like one vit tech and like an intern or something like that, but that's not like leading a team. And this was my first experience like leading a group of people, which is another reason why I wanted to take it, right? I need to learn the operations. I felt important to learn Spanish, and I need to develop leadership. Because if I'm going to be like a director of something one day, and I haven't led a group of people, like sounds like a mistake. And that's really where I felt like I cut my teeth on like my leadership style. And luckily they were very patient with me, and like I was able to make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, adapt. And I felt like we started to develop, I felt like we started to improve really fast, way faster than if I had come in and said, this is how we're going to do everything. And like at that same time, this would have been like spring of 2018, I started to really fully grasp like the capabilities that they had, and decided to develop this kind of idea that had been kicking around in my brain, which was like, well, why don't I just let them loose, right? And I went to the 3 supervisors at the time, and I said, you know, Francisco, you're Spirit Hill, and I want you to pick some blocks throughout the vineyard. Let's call it 3 different blocks, sections of blocks. I need about like 1.5 tons to 2 tons out of each of those sections. And I want you to farm it however you want to farm it. I'm here for you if you want to know the why, or if you want my advice, no problem. But I'm not influencing you in any way whatsoever. And I remember specifically standing up at Spirit Hill, and I'm explaining this to him, and like at this point it's just a concept in my mind, right? Like, I want you to go and farm it. And I said the only rule that I have is that like you can't pick a block that like is already the winemaker's favorite section, right? Like that's cheating. We already know that's good. I want you to go find an underdog, right? And I remember explaining it to him that I'm like, take your time. It doesn't have to be today. And he like cuts me off, and he's like, yeah, the east 15 rows of block 22. And I'm like, okay. It's pretty specific, also very quick. How the hell did you get to that? And he's like, oh, let's go look. We drive over there, and he's like, see, the leaves are different, and the canopy has like a smaller look. The canes are a little bit smaller. The berries are smaller. They're a little bit thicker. And he's like, you can even see that now. And this is like the spring, right? He's like, the berries aren't on there. And he's like, you can see that now. And you see how the clusters of these tiny little things. And he's like, and look at the soil. And he's like, it's rockier, right? I'm like, okay, why do you think that's important? He's like, I don't know. But I know that the vines are smaller. Maybe they struggle in it. And I remember thinking like, holy shit, like we're onto something, right? Like he just, out of nowhere, first time I ever explained this to him, explains why this section of this vineyard is perfect for Pinot Noir. And this section was like a dog in the past, right? Like, it's fine. It, makes sparkling wine. It's not like anyone's ever been like, ooh, we need to make Pinot Noir out of there. And he just knew that this section, not the other 100 rows in that block, but these 15 were it. And he was able to explain why he felt like it was. He didn't know the why, but he felt like it was. It's not like he sat down and done tastings in the past. It's not like he's, like had somebody be like, oh, well, this is what a great Pinot Noir looks like. He just knew that that's what it's supposed to be. And I remember getting like goosebumps at that point. I'm like, all right, this could be something really cool. And it was amazing watching them throughout that year. Like all three of them took completely different approaches to how they're going to manage it. And they were like, as soon as I told them that like, there's no restrictions. I don't care what the crop looks like at the end. I don't care if it's down to 1 ton per acre. I don't care. Like we'll deal with it. Just do it. They started trying all sorts of stuff. And like things that you don't learn in a textbook or that somebody doesn't teach you, right? And a lot of those practices, like I remember the first time Francisco in particular like showed me one. He's like, well, here's how I want to shoot thin. And I was like, I've never seen that before, but it looks awesome. Let's try it. And we watched it throughout the season. I was like, dude, that's it. Like, I think we found that for our high-end blocks. And he's like, cool. And then we just took it and we expanded it to everything else, right? But at the end of that season, what we did was we had those three vineyards, 3 supervisors. Each one had like 3 sections of Pinot Noir. And we brought the winemaker out and we're like, let's let them pick when they want to harvest it. And I remember their faces being like, why would I make that decision? We're like, because it's going to be fine either way. Like, we're within this range. It's personal preference at this point. So when do you want to pick it? And they're like, like Hector's like, oh, it's not ready. And I'm like, why is it not ready? And he's like, I don't know. He's like, but it's not. And I'm like, all right, let's do it. Like, when do you think it's going to be ready? He's like, next week. I'm like, you're acting like a true winemaker now. I love this. And so we picked them. We kept them separate. We fermented them separate in the winery. We had them back into the winery the following spring when we were getting ready to blend. And we just said like, here's your 3 wines, 3 wines, 3 wines. We all tasted it together. We talked about why each one kind of tasted different than the others. And at the end, the winemaker's like, all right, Hector, which one's your favorite? And he's like, I don't know, I guess I like block 3 better. And he's like, cool. All right, we might bottle that separate. And I remember Hector being like, why? Why would you do that? And we're like, I don't know, why not? It's a good wine. You farmed it. Why wouldn't we do something like that? And then they went away and they forgot all about it. And in the back end, I was working with Kathy and Steve at the time. And this was like kind of part of like this vision, if you will, of what I had for this program was like, I wanted it to start organically with just they farm it however they want to farm it. And then I worked with the winemaker to be like, let's see what it tastes like at the end. And then I went to Kathy and I was like, look, Kathy, like, can we make this into its own wine? Like, I think we've got something here. And I came up with like that program. I came up with the name, which was Ojo Brioso, and I didn't come up with that name. That was what they were using in the vineyard when I first started. And like, I remember talking to my translator, I'm like, they keep saying this term and I don't know what it means. And I couldn't even remember exactly, like it took us probably like 2 months to get to the bottom of it. And she's like, Geoff, that's not a term. And I'm like, are you sure? Because I think they use it a lot. And she like called her friend who's from Mexico and she's like, okay, I think I know. It's not an actual term. I think they're just making it up, but they're probably using it as like a good catch, like a good eye sort of thing. And I'm like, yep, that's it. That makes sense. And it basically translates to like brilliant eye. But they were using it as in like, oh, you're over in a row pruning and the person in the row next to you forgets to prune off one of the spurs or something. It's like, hey, you got to come back, you got to prune it. I'm like, oh, yeah, gracias, ojo brioso, like good catch. And I remember Marquez, who, you know, he's like the godfather of the vineyard, like yelling it all the time. And I still remember like asking Hector and Francisco, I'm like, what does it mean? They're like, doesn't mean anything. And I'm like, okay. But I loved that they were using it in that way, right? And it seemed to fit into this like perfect idea of like, they know what they're doing. And whatever I'm going to tell them on what to do is probably not better than whatever they could come up with, right? I'm there to guide them. There to help them along the way. I need this block to be like this. How do we get there? ¿Qué piensas? What do you think? And that Obrioso was like perfect example of them like keeping themselves in check as well, right? Like, this is a good idea, this is a good catch. Always keeping an eye on things. And so we decided to develop that into a 3-pack. And we took like the Spirit Hill, the Knudsen, and the Lone Star. Each one had the vineyard supervisor's name on the back of the label. And then we needed to come up with the art. And we got very lucky at that point because we had one of the PNCA Art of Sparkling artists who came from Mexico, and his style of painting was this like Mexican surrealism. And I remember being like, can we ask him to come out and like, can he do the label for this? He came out, met with all 3 of the supervisors in the vineyard going around, and they're talking about what they're, you know, why they decided to farm it this way. And he went out and then he presented a few months later this like beautiful work of art that is this huge mural, which coincidentally at the time, we didn't know it, but like it's this very kind of like dark red cloud and scene, which fit perfectly with 2020. It's a little foreshadowing there. We didn't realize it at the time. But it's this like really cool, like kind of epic landscape. And he put all these really neat features in there where he's like, well, this is Spirit Hill in the spring, this is Lone Star in the summer, and this is Knudsen in the winter. And then he's like, and I think at the time we had like 20 employees, and he's like, there's 20 people all around here, right? And there's like an old truck, and there's a barn, and there's all these people working in the fields. And it felt like a good nod to like their culture and the work that they do. And so we took that and then we split it in thirds and then put each one of those thirds, so if you line the bottles up there, makes it look like it's the mural. And I remember like working with Kathy and Steve, and this is 2020, so I'm like in my trailer at my house, like on a Zoom call or whatever. And I remember being like, I remember thinking this is nice, like this is a good thing to do, like I wanted it to give back to their community, so like we had come up with like giving some money to Salud and to AHIVOY, which was just starting at the time, and the Roots Fund, and we were like, you know, I didn't realize it from like a marketing perspective or whatever, a sales perspective. I was just like, I just want to do this because I think they deserve it, right? And I remember Steve being like, no, you have to understand something, like this is unique. Like I've never seen anything like this in the wine industry. And he's like, we have to do this. Like this is such, it's so important, and it's so important to like the values that we had and to the people that we worked with. And when we decided to launch it, my big thing was like, this doesn't get launched to anyone until it gets launched to them, right? Like they didn't know it was coming at the time. And so the first thing that we ever did was we went up to the vineyard and we pulled everyone in, and I was like, okay, I just, want to say thank you for everything you guys do here, and probably had just an awful speech in Spanish, to be honest with you, that I had probably practiced for like weeks ahead of time. But like, I was like presenting this wine, I pull it out and I'm like handing it to Hector and Francisco and Jose at the time. And I remember like Hector turning the bottle over and he's like, Geoff, it says my name on the back. And I'm like, yeah, I know it does, because it should. You did that wine. And he's like, whoa. And I'm like, so go home, like celebrate, drink it with your wife. And he's like, no, I'm not drinking this. This is going on my shelf. You kidding me? And I remember just like that look on his face when he got it for the first time. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that was it. That was worth it. Like that pride that they have, and you have to understand, this is a couple years after I'd started, right? And so like we had a few years of working together, and but it sort of like encapsulated this feeling that I had where they have so much pride in the work that they do, and they're so knowledgeable about it that it's like incredibly inspiring just to like watch it happen and watch it unfold every year. And like, going back to Marquez, like the number of times he's walked up and he's probably seen every single vine in that vineyard, right? Like, there's no way that my 10 years at the time experience was ever going to match that. And I think through that Ojo Brioso program, like not only were we like trying to empower them, I don't think the purpose was ever to sell wine. And that program has like been fine. It's been small on purpose this whole time, and like I'm kind of safeguarding it from trying to blow up or anything. But it's like, I loved seeing the way that it not only changed the supervisors, but changed the people that they manage, and like everybody feels like they have a voice, everybody feels like they're a part of something and they're moving in the same direction. That's really inspiring for me to like be involved with that, and to like see it now evolve into this new phase of it, which like as of 2021, like Erica Miller comes on as the vineyard manager. I step into my new role, and it could have, if I had hired the wrong person, I could see that program like that person's maybe not as like into it, whatever, it's not a big deal. And she took it and like kickstarted it again. She's like, this is great. Let's do more of it, and let's expand it more. Let's do more blocks. Let's let them make more decisions. And watching the crew evolve over the last 4 years under Erica's guidance is just like, again, it's just the next phase of something that's really cool. And they're like, I look at Hector and Francisco, who, when I started, they were not the supervisors. They had been the supervisors for like 2 months before I started or something. And I think they would admit like they still had a lot to learn about like leading people and like, general operations. And now looking at them, and we're like, these guys are incredible. Mm-hmm. Like they're full on leaders in the industry. People call them because they respect them. They're so knowledgeable that like, I don't know, there's something that I say, like when I used to be in the vineyards, I used to feel very proud of like the product, right? And I used to be like, when I was at St. Michele, I'd be like, this, I helped grow these grapes, and this, is from this vintage or whatever. And like, not to say that I don't care about that anymore, but like, that's not where I take my pride at all. Because like, for one, I'm not the person doing it. Mm-hmm. And two, like, if you were to ask like, well, where do you get the most sense of pride? It's like watching those guys, like watching Hector and Francisco and like their world now, and just like the confidence that's in them, and they are like owning those vineyards is really cool to see. That next phase that Erica brought on at the same time, when I was mentioning like what the Ojo Brioso program was going to donate to, like I knew Salud, I knew Letta, I loved Salud, and that was like, I was really focused on that. And somebody was like, well, what about AHIVOY? And I'm like, well, I don't even know what that is. It was like just starting at that point. And luckily we decided like, all right, let's do it. Let's give this kind of like new program a start. And we've sent now 7 people through. Hector was the first, and that has been like an incredible success story for not only like the industry, but for ourselves, which is like watching Hector go through that program and come out the other end. Like, again, just like the AHIVOY was, like his confidence is higher. He knows what he needs to do. It's basically like an executive MBA for a vineyard steward. People call him. He knows who to call on what to solve. But I remember at the end of that, Hector gets his, and we have like a graduation, right? This is up at Lang, I think at the time, which would have been spring of 2022. And so Erica had been with us for like less than a year. We go, and Kathy goes, and we go up to this graduation. It's like very inspiring to watch all these people get their degrees and give speeches. And afterwards, we pull Hector off to the side, and we're like, hey man, just a couple photos with you, and we're taking some photos. He's really happy. And I'm like, so what do you think? Like, did you like the program? And he's like, yeah, I loved it. I'm like, oh, that's really good. And he's like, well, you guys need to understand that this is the first diploma of any type that anyone in my family has ever received. And I remember being like, God, like Erica and I are like on the verge of tears, and he's like so proud. He's like, I'm gonna take this home, I'm gonna show my family, and I'm gonna show my family's family. And I'm like, oh my God. And we didn't realize like the power of that program at the time, but that was like our moment where like cemented, and we're like, we need to keep supporting this, and we need to keep sending people to here. Because the next year we sent 3 people through, and like Eric and I joke about it now, we're like, I was gonna have to miss the graduation for some reason. I had to fly somewhere. I'm like, that's okay, I still wanna celebrate, and let's go out for lunch like a couple days before. When we go out for lunch and we sit him down, and Hector came because he was a graduate as well, and we're like, all right, we just, this isn't a free lunch. We wanna hear what you guys thought of the program. Anything that we should change? And it was like, just all these ideas flowed out of them. And Erica and I were sitting there, and she's like taking notes, like, that's a good idea, I like that. And they were like, why are we pruning this way? Why shouldn't we be pruning this way? Have you guys thought about how we should be doing this? And we're like, oh my God, what have we done, right? Like, and we get done with the lunch, and like we step outside, and we're like, holy crap, that was powerful. Like, those guys are engaged. They're so much more knowledgeable about it than they were before. They understood the why, right? And that for me kind of like felt full circle of the AHIVOY program, right? Which was like, give them a shot. They have this innate knowledge, and then on the back end of it, it's like, send them to a program where they get to learn the why. They knew what they were supposed to be doing. Now they know the why they were doing those things. And again, like watching them grow, and everyone we sent through is like, they're a different person when they come out the other end. Mm-hmm. And we're better for it. Like, it makes Erica and I's job so much easier. Yeah, anyway, I don't know. I've been talking for a while about that. You're gonna laugh because like, if Erica was here, like, first of all, she has no hesitation giving me shit, but she would be like, really, you told that again, huh? I'd be like, yeah, of course I did. Because just last week we had some people in from RNDC, like the big wigs at RNDC, and I step out of my office just to be like, I'm Geoff, nice to meet you, so excited you're gonna taste with Kate, this is gonna be great. And Elizabeth, our marketing person, goes like, do you have 7 minutes? And I'm like, that's an incredibly specific amount of time, why? And she's like, could you tell them what you're most proud of at your time here at Argyle? And I was like, that's not a 7-minute conversation. And she's like, try. And I get done talking with it, I'm like, halfway through, I'm like, Eric, get up here because you need to be involved in this. It's 30 minutes later. And Elizabeth is like, that wasn't 7 minutes. And I'm like, there was no way I was gonna do it. And Erica's like, honestly, he did it faster than normal. But it's because, like, I don't know, like, we were talking about like the pride in the wine, right? Like, I have that pride in the wine, and I certainly want us to always make good wine, but like, that's not what I'll probably remember in 20 years or whatever, right? Like, I won't look back and be like, yeah, I made a really good bottle of wine. At the end of the day, it's going to come down to like who I worked with and where they are in their careers, and that's the if you want to say, like, that's where I find the like enjoyment out of it.
Mm-hmm. I was on the founding board of AHIVOY, and I was on it for until 2022. So I'm very glad to hear. This is the best description I've heard of it in an interview. I'm very, very happy to hear the success story from your end.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just joined the board.
I knew that
in the spring.
Because I was the last graduation. I was the one down at Schmekeda.
Yeah.
And I saw you, but you were talking and we were leaving. So anyway, not for the interview, just because I knew you were part of the board now, and I'm glad.
Yeah.
It was kind of one of those things. Kind of one of those. I gave what I had, and then I was happy to see more people coming on the board.
Yeah, and that was very intentional for me, and I think it's been like an evolution in my career. When I was at St. Michele, like, part of your job there was to be involved in every committee and be like in the know, right? St. Michele, we needed to like know what was happening all the time. And that's like really valuable. But what I found was, like, when I started at Argyle, I'm like, well, I can't do that. And like, one, it's not fair to the people I'm working with because they need me to be here. I need to be focused on what I'm supposed to be doing. And like it said before, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So I cut myself out of like all of those for years. And then earlier this year, I was like, it's time. Mm-hmm. It's time for like a few reasons. Like, one, I feel like my team here is like rock solid, ready to take on whatever they need to. They know what they're supposed to be doing. And I'm like, I can step away from that. But two, I was like, I need to find something that, like, if I'm going to go and do something, I want to make sure it's something that's valuable. And like, AHIVOY was it. It was the only one I thought of. And so I'm happy to be a part of the board because I have seen firsthand that impact that AHIVOY has.
So you mentioned in 2021 that you brought Erica in, you kind of stepped into a new role. So tell us about kind of your new role now. What is your day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month work look like, and what have been your sort of your biggest accomplishments you feel like over the past 4 years?
Yeah. So it's very different than vineyard management, if you can imagine. I started by taking over the packaging side of things. That, like, again, I didn't know anything about packaging. So I did a deep dive and learned as much as I possibly could. I hired the right people. Like, I think, somebody asked me this the other day, like, what do you think your biggest strength is? And it's like assembling the right team. I knew what gaps we had, and I knew who or what type of person I wanted in those roles. So we built that packaging side into like a well-oiled machine. Not to say that we don't still have places we can improve, we always will, but like, it's operating at an efficiency that like was never there before. And we're lucky that we did, because we grew a lot during that time, and it allowed us to grow. So I'm super proud of like where we are right now in terms of packaging, dry goods ordering, inventory. And then a few years ago, this would have been like 22, 23, took on the cellar, and then recently took on like basically the whole winery, which includes the winemaking team. And so I think that's been like a pretty like gradual step into each of those, and every one of them has been like a new learning experience for me, which I think is what, if I sit back and think of like why I keep taking on this extra responsibility instead of just being satisfied with where I'm at, is one, I have a hard time saying no, and two, like where I see a need and where I see that I can help and like fix things, I feel like I have to do that. I'm like, and the third thing is like, I'm always curious. I need to learn about the next thing. And it's not that like I'm walking away from like the vineyard side of things being like, ooh, I figured it all out. Like Erica's leaps and bounds better than I ever was. She was on day one that she started here, right? And that's the right thing for me, right? Is like I'm hiring people who are better than I ever will be at what their roles are. And so like if you think about like where we've evolved I've been here 8 years now, like we're a completely different team. We're a different winery, we run in a different way. We brought in Kate last year, or I guess earlier this year. We have a new cellar, we have Rachel as a new associate. Like every step has felt like a massive improvement. And that's not to say that like things were bad in the past. What I'm saying is like we're always trying to improve, we're always trying to move forward. And it's been really cool, and like it's hard to explain. Like we just had a post-harvest meeting, and it's hard to sit there in the room and like and try to like explain to everyone like how I've seen it evolve over 8 years when some of these people have been here less than 6 months, right? And I'm like, no, you don't understand, right? Like this is incredible. Where we are right now is incredible, right? Because I think we all, and I don't think it's unhealthy, we all are like, I wish we could have done that better. I wish we could do that better, right? And we get into those meetings and we think like, well, what are we going to do next year that's different? And I'm like, take a second and like realize where we're at, right? And I think like I sat in this room last week with Erica and Kate, and like Kate felt like the last piece of the puzzle to put everything together, right? Like Erica comes in, she takes on and like kicks ass in the vineyard. Clayton comes in, he takes on the packaging side and kicks ass. Tommy comes in and takes on the facilities. And then the cellar felt like kind of the last little bit. And like Rachel comes in, and then Kate on top of that is like, it feels like a complete team. And I was telling them that like, they've worked together in the past, but like, and I knew that, and it was part of the reason why I was so excited about hiring Kate, but like, that doesn't mean that how they've worked together in the past was how they're gonna work here. And also like trying to keep in mind how much change and transition we've seen even in the last year, right? Which is like, we had the second ever winemaker leave at the end of last year. And a year ago, the people who were here from the 2023 vintage, there's not a single person left other than who's now our cellar master. And that's a big transition to deal with, considering how large of a size we are and how storied of a history Argyle has, and how much responsibility like this place is. And so like, that's pretty inspiring to think like, hey guys, like we could have come out of this vintage and had a whole bunch of excuses, right? We could have come out and been like, it's Kate's first year, she didn't know the process, they didn't communicate on something because somebody thought somebody else was doing something, and that didn't happen. Like, and this is what I was telling them, is like, we have no excuses. Like, there's nothing that we can point to that's like, ooh, we screwed that up. Like, can we improve? Sure, but like, the wines are better than they've ever been. We did it in the best way we've ever done it. And they like had fun doing it. Like, it's hard for me to say that because I know it's stressful all the time, but like watching those two work together is like a joy. And this is, a good example of Kate and Erica not letting me take myself too seriously, but like the day that the last grapes come in, right? We're sitting outside, I'm like, I just want to talk to you guys for 1 second. And I'm like, look, I just wanted to say, and Erica stopped, she's like, geez, are you gonna cry? And I'm like, I'm not gonna cry. I just want to, I have allergies, and they're like, oh man, but let's hear it. And I'm like, I'm just really proud of you guys, and like the way that you work together. And they're like, we thought you were gonna cry. I'm like, can't even give a compliment here. But it is like super inspiring to see like we joke around about like Argyle 2.0, right? Which is like funny because it's been around for almost 40 years at this point. But it's like, it feels like feels like we're going in a completely new direction. It's incredibly exciting.
So let's look ahead a little bit then. Tell me about as you have the kind of a new team in place and new people in certain spots. What do the next few years look like for Argyle? What are you looking forward to? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone has their head in the sand to know that the industry is in a tough spot. I think we at Argyle are in an incredibly enviable position right now in that we are not contracting nearly the same speed as it feels like a lot of people are. Our number one SKU is still growing year over year by double digits. So like, we're very fortunate for that, and we recognize that we're coming from that position. I think that we still don't want to rest on our laurels and be like, oh, well, we're just going to be fine. So I think in terms of like where we're going to go over the next few years, like we are going to innovate and adapt, and not because just like we feel the pressure to, but because I don't think this team, myself included, has the ability to just be like, it's fine. We're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. And so I think like as I watch, Kate coming in, and certainly on the packaging side, we've seen that in facilities, and Erica, like we're always evolving and adapting. And so I don't think it's a question of whether we're going to push ourselves to get better. We will. I guess I'm just excited to see where we go from there. And I think we talked about it like where like it feels like I have a complete team, right? And this is the first time in a few years where I feel like I get to step back and be like, okay, everybody's running exactly the way they need to run, and people are communicating and working together. Where do I think we're going to be in 5 years from now, right? And like kind of get to plan that out. And that's a new kind of evolution for me, which like if we start with where I was and basically every step up to that, it was like, I don't know what I want to do. Let's just go there and figure it out. So this is like a cool, I guess like evolution where I get to start thinking about, all right, where does Argyle want to be in 5 years and how are we going to get there? Because everything up to this point has felt, I don't want to say reactionary because we've been very intentional, but like it has felt like that at times. We're like, ooh boy, we have this gap, we're growing, we need to figure out how to fill that hole. What are we going to do, right? And we've made the right decisions to get up to this point. We don't need to throw everything out and start over again. But now it's like, and Kate's great at reminding me all the time, like our term is like intentionality. How are we going to make the wine that we need to make, grow the grapes that we need to, package it in a certain way, and also like step back and in 5 years from now, be like, that's what we want Argyle to look like. And we have to do that by planning intentionally. And that's my challenge, right? Is how are we going to get there? And I don't want to say that I'm doing that alone by any means. They are always going to have better ideas than I will in terms of how we can grow. But I'm excited for what that looks like in the next few years.
You talked about kind of a challenging time for the industry, obviously for alcohol in general, for the Oregon wine industry, for any all of it. Tell me about on an Oregon-wide level, how do you see the industry right now? How have the last couple of years affected it? Where does it go from here?
I think it's the same thing that I was saying about Argyle. Like, we're so fortunate to be in this little bubble that we're in right now, and I know it's really hard times, and I know it's hard for me to sit here and say that when there are a lot of people that are struggling, and I get that. But like, I have colleagues in California, I have colleagues in Washington, and like, that stuff's crazy. Like, that's a complete reversal. Ours feels like a correction. And if you look at like the press around Oregon, you look at Nielsen data on how Oregon's doing, like it's not in a bad spot. And we're lucky that we are where we are, where we don't try to make a bunch of $7 bottles of wine. We make a lot of really great $20 to $30 and $40 bottles of wine and up. And like, we are contracting, but also we're contracting from like the like irrational craziness that was like 21 and 22, which like we look back and we're like, oof, what were we thinking, sort of thing. But I don't think like the Oregon industry's going anywhere. And you look at like where people are investing, it's here. You know, you've got like French companies, Italian companies, you know, private equity investing in here. And it's like, I think if I would, you know, it's easy for me to say this, but like, I think if I was to sit back and like look at the 3 major wine industries in the US and be like, which one do you want to be a part of that has the best future? Like, it's Oregon. Without a doubt, it's Oregon. And so I think we're lucky. I think we need to ride that wave over the next couple of years and probably do some soul searching on what Oregon looks like, again, 5 years from now. Because I think the one thing that I've loved about Oregon ever since I started here that's felt different than any industry I've worked in is it's incredibly collaborative. It's like nobody feels like they're alone. And you can pick up the phone and ask anyone what you should be doing, and they're going to give you the best advice. Like, they're not going to sugarcoat it. And so I guess, like, again, I think we're lucky that we're an industry that feels like it's growing and that we all feel like we're in it together rather than we're against each other in those things. So.
What about what's next for you personally or professionally? Anything on your horizon that you're excited about? Anything you haven't done yet that you need to do?
Yeah, I mean, tons of stuff I haven't done before. Whether I would be any good at it, I don't know. I think if I, like, again, getting my team to where they are now and has allowed me to think about other stuff. So I'm doing like a sales immersion with the wholesale team because I sat back a year ago and I was like, I don't know enough about it and I'd love to be able to be educated. So very fortunate that my company was like, yeah, we can do that for you. And very fortunate that Ryan is in charge of all the sales, was like, I'm going to set up this program. So that's been really great. I think learning more about that, learning more about hospitality, general leadership as well. I've been very fortunate to had a leadership coach for the last few months. And one of the things that I kind of recognized about myself was like everything I've done leadership style up to this point has been this very organic, figure it out on my own thing, which I'm very proud of like where we're at now, but also like having her come in and be like, okay, well, let me help you refine that. Or let me give you some language about what that means, has been really helpful for me in terms of like my own development. I don't know, maybe one day it's not just in charge of operations, but in charge of, you know, the hospitality side of things as well or something. I don't know yet. But I'm always open to new things. And I think like I said, I've been very lucky that I've fallen into kind of every one of these roles in the past. And so I'm not out there like jumping and screaming, oh, I need this and I want that. And it's, if I'm the right fit at the right time, yeah. Just whether or not my wife, a couple weeks ago, she's like, really? You want to start over and learn something new and do hospitality? You have 2 young kids. And I'm like, yeah, that's a consideration. That's a good point. She's like, kind of like having you around on the weekends now. And I'm like, yep, solid point. So like, I mean, you know, that's a factor in my life. So as much as I love what I do, it is not who I am. So yeah, I always have to consider that.
It's good to have a voice of reason somewhere around.
She's really good at that.
All right, all the questions I have for you today. Anything I didn't ask that I should have, anything we didn't cover that you're hoping to cover today?
No, I don't think so. It's good talking with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was great talking with you. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story with us. And go ahead and let you off the hook.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.